Omar Badr, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Of course. Always good to be with you guys.
All right, so let's start with Ryan Grimm of Dropsite News and Counterpoints.
Yeah.
He went to the State Department press briefing here, and he asked real-life cartoon villain Matthew Miller a question about what's been going on in Lebanon. Let's take a look at that and then get your reaction.
So you said earlier that Israel has a right to attack Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. I wanted to ask if you had seen the Israeli Prime Minister's video that he put out in English to the people of Lebanon last night. He had a couple lines in there. He said, "You have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. I say to you, the people of Lebanon, free your country from Hezbollah so that this war can end." That seems like a blanket threat against the civilian population. Is that terrorism?
So, first of all, let me say we cannot and must not see the situation in Lebanon turn into anything like the situation in Gaza. That would, of course, not be acceptable. And ultimately, it is as I said in response to an earlier question, it is up to the Lebanese people, not anybody else, to decide on who their government is. I said in response to an earlier question, no country in the region should dictate to the Lebanese people who their leaders are. Not Israel, not the United States, not any of the other countries in the region, and that should continue.
But Israel is dictating
to
that.
be the case. No, they're conducting operations going after a terrorist organization. That's a different thing than dictating what the civilian government should be. That's a question for the Lebanese people to decide. So,
but if they decide against Israel's wishes, Israel is threatening Gaza-like annihilation of the people of Lebanon.
And I'm making very clear that there should be no kind of military action in Lebanon that looks anything like Gaza and leaves a result anything like Gaza.
Omar, your thoughts?
You know, what we're getting from the State Department, this is all reminiscent of the same thing that we got from Biden's red line on Rafah. They're saying that we don't want to see the same kind of fighting in Lebanon. But in fact, it is actually unfolding. What we're witnessing right now in South Lebanon is very reminiscent of what has unfolded in Gaza. The sheer, utter destruction of the infrastructure throughout the entire area, the targeting of medics, I mean, just all of it. It's just a scale of atrocities that we also have not seen. The one thing that is a little bit different, though, is that Israel sees different kinds of opportunities in Lebanon and in Gaza. I think in the case of Lebanon, of course, what's common between the two is the fact that the U.S. election is only weeks away. And in that final stretch, they know that the Biden administration is going to be very hesitant to rock the boat and to confront Netanyahu on anything major. So they see this as an opportunity to squeeze in as much damage as they possibly can. And in the case of Lebanon, there's also the added factor of the fact that Hezbollah has been a very significant and major rival for Israel that they've been very nervous about confronting, but knew that that confrontation was going to come at some point. And the fact that they've had this major intelligence penetration of Hezbollah that allowed them to decapitate the entire leadership a few weeks ago, Israel sees that as an opportunity that might never come again. And that's why they invaded Lebanon. They see this as potentially their last chance to really undermine Hezbollah in a real way. But because the ground fighting is not actually working out well, their anticipation that decapitating the leadership would mean that Hezbollah can't fight on the ground has not materialized. And Hezbollah is inflicting significant damage on Israeli soldiers who are invading Lebanon. Now they're shifting to this other strategy of significant infrastructural damage. And part of what happened in Netanyahu's speech is calling on the Lebanese population to turn on Hezbollah, essentially trying to foment sectarian civil war within Lebanon, given the fact that Israel seems to not be able to pull off the job on their own, trying to figure out a way to capitalize on this moment. And it doesn't look good, frankly. It looks like we are really headed towards a very, very dark and prolonged level of fighting that we're going to see in Lebanon.
What can we say about what the U.S. administration even thinks about all of this? I mean, Biden, obviously very decrepit at this point, but very committed Zionist. You had this report that, you know, the State Department and the Department of Defense were really wary of this Lebanon invasion, but then they were overruled effectively by like Brett McGurk and that other dude, Amos Hochstein, I think is his name, who were like, no, we're for it. This is great. We see this also as an opportunity to, quote unquote, remake the Middle East and rebalance the Middle East. We also had this report report that the U.S. was considering not only backing Israel strikes on Iran, but potentially even getting in the game ourselves and doing our own direct strikes, which is also not even constitutional if you don't go to Congress. So what can we say at this point about all of this kabuki theater of the Biden administration really pretending like they're upset with what Bibi Netanyahu is doing, but at the same respect, enabling it every step of the way?
Yeah, you're putting your finger exactly on the problem. I mean, there's so much mixed reporting about the behind the scenes kind of conversations. It's unclear whether Biden hates what Israel's doing, but it's basically going along with it to not rock the boat, or whether Biden actually fully endorses what Israel's doing, is only pretending to object to it. But that entire spectrum leaves off the possibility of the U.S. being a meaningful player right now, and offering a layer of de-escalation in any direction doesn't seem to be on the table at all. Even if someone wanted to buy the more charitable interpretation, was that Biden is really upset and wants this to stop, but is not sure what to do about it. All this talk about red lines and discouragement can only mean something if you have an or else on the table. And Biden has made it absolutely clear that there is no or else, that American policy is unquestionable, unconditional diplomatic and military support for Israel, no matter what Israel does. And that means that Netanyahu is in the driver's seat. Effectively, it means that Netanyahu is driving American policy. This is an exceptionally pathetic moment for this administration, a moment in which there's a complete and total abdication of American leadership, at a moment when American leadership is desperately needed to stop us from the slide towards a catastrophic regional war. We've never been closer to it. I mean, even the situation with Iran at this point, the prospect of a full-scale war between Israel and Iran is absolutely terrifying. The amount of death and destruction that's going to result from that kind of confrontation is absolutely immense. And the fact that Biden seems to understand that this would be catastrophic and repeats the idea that nobody wants that war to happen, and yet they're not willing to apply any brakes on Israel's behavior in order to find an off-ramp for this confrontation. There really are, it's difficult to find the words for how disappointing that is from an administration that has simply allowed Israel to do whatever it wants every step of the way, no matter how horrific their atrocities are. The annihilation of Gaza that is unfolding before our eyes, this huge escalation in Lebanon, and now the prospect of a regional war with Iran through direct military strikes on Iran. It's baffling that we're sitting here and watching this unfold, knowing what the risks are for the people in the region, for U.S. interests in the region, for the global economy, for the entire world. And the fact that we're not really doing and stepping in and doing what needs to be done in this moment to get an off-ramp from this catastrophe.
So some friends of ours have a theory that I want to run by you. Curious what you think of this. It's the idea that this has now gotten so insanely out of hand. It's so obviously savage and barbaric and genocidal. And, you know, every other week you get leaks of, you saw the one the other day where Biden allegedly behind the scenes is like, what the fuck, BB? And like, you're turning into a rogue state, bro. You know how people view you? There's all these like, oh, he's really, really angry, cursed him out. Like, you get a lot of that stuff. Our friend's theory is that Netanyahu has told Biden and his administration that if you cut off our weapons, that's fine. We'll just use nukes. And that sort of puts them in the position of like, well, but shit. Well, what are we going to do in that scenario? We'll keep sending them the weapons, but we'll publicly be like, this is bad, and wag our fingers. Do you think that that theory is remotely plausible, or just any like similar theory of, you know, Netanyahu being the one sort of playing 3D chess and holding something over the heads of the Biden administration?
Yeah, if I can separate that out, I think that conversation is implausible to me, simply because if that is a threat that Netanyahu is communicating explicitly, if the Biden administration leaks this to the press, that this is part of what's happening, they can turn the tables. I mean, there would absolutely would have to be. I mean, you never know what the way Republicans are these days, whether they would actually condemn that kind of rhetoric or not. But it seems like that could be leverage that is used against Netanyahu if he's engaged in that kind of utterly insane rhetoric as a means of pressuring Biden to do whatever Netanyahu wants. On the other hand, I don't actually rule out the possibility that Israel ends up using nuclear weapons if we see this confrontation to its natural end. If the United States sits out a war between Israel and Iran, or frankly, even if it joins it, it's unclear. If we allow that confrontation to unfold in its totality, I'm not certain that Israel will not find itself in a position where either it has to back down and escalate or use nuclear weapons. And when we look at the level of fanaticism that exists within this government right now, it's frankly 50-50 whether they would actually choose a nuclear war over de-escalation, given the fact that we've nurtured this pathology in Israeli political culture through a policy of complete and total impunity for them, where they feel like they can do whatever they want, and they feel like the prospect of de-escalation is not on the table. You tell them you've killed, who knows? The numbers in Gaza, by the way, are almost certainly an underestimate, the official numbers.
Oh, yeah.
The real ones are very likely going to be over 100,000 and even significantly more than that, possibly, if we allow this to continue. And yet, none of this is enough for Israel to take the win, in a way, to say that agree to a ceasefire at this point. You've destroyed all of Gaza. You've killed a significant portion of the population. It's time to de-escalate and settle to something reasonable. And their attitude, they're so drunk on power that the answer is no, we're going to just continue with our policy of complete and total annihilation until the end of time, until we have the complete and utter surrender of people on the other side. And if that is the ongoing mentality of the fanatics who are in the Israeli government, then what does a confrontation with Iran look like if Iran is raining thousands of ballistic missiles over Israel because Israel is engaged in an endless path of escalation? Does Israel then at the end of it decide to use nukes? I find that to be perfectly plausible and extremely disturbing and worrying. And again, just the lack of appreciation for the magnitude of the catastrophe that we are confronting. And even if one did not want to care about the fate of Palestinians who have just suffered the absolute most absurd levels of atrocities that we really thought we were beyond at this point in age, in terms of what what global discourse would tolerate, to have happen to people, it's nothing is beyond the pale at this point, and I think anything is really possible.
All right, guys, that's a short clip from the interview we did with Omar Badr on Israel and Lebanon and Iran and being on the brink of war, if not already in war. You definitely want to check out the whole thing. Do yourself a favor, sign up on Substack below.